Hello guys. I want to talk to you guys a little bit about section 9.1, type 1 and type 2 error. I mentioned a little bit about it earlier, but now I want to be a little bit more thorough with that. Okay. So let's start with the premise here for the type 1 error. We'll start with this. Let's say I run a pet store, and it's common knowledge nationwide that 70% of households have a dog. So I would say this. For HO, I'll use another marker. For the null hypothesis of HO, I would say that the proportion of houses that have a dog is 70%. Okay? Now, I think in my neighborhood or my area that that's not the case. I think it's less than that. So my alternative hypothesis would be that P is less than 0.70. Now, so the national average is 70% of households have a dog. I think it's less than, I'm going to go with 70% is what I think it is. And I run a pet store. Now, here's what a type 1 error does. On a type 1 error, remember it's an error, so this is wrong. You reject the null, and you go with the alternative. So on a type 1 error, here's what would happen. I would say, yeah, the null is wrong. 0.70 is wrong. I have evidence indicating it's less than that. So I would think, yeah, it's less than 0.70. So P is less than 0.70. But that's an error. It's wrong. So what happens is that the average actually is 0.70, and I think it's less than that. So I changed my business model. I don't carry as much dog stuff. I put more cat stuff in, more fish stuff, because I think that in my neighborhood it's less than 70%. And the consequence of that would be I'd be losing business because more people have dogs than what I anticipated. It actually is the average of 70%. But with a type 1 error, I reject the null, think it's the alternative, less than 70% in this case, and therefore I change my business structure that I wouldn't cater to people that have dogs. Which would be a mistake. Remember, it's an error. So that's a type 1 error, is you reject the null. Just remember that. Type 1, you reject the null, you go with the alternative, whether it be upper, higher than what's average, lower than what's average, or both. It's just not the same. Okay, so that's type 1. Now let's go to type 2. Type 2 error we fail to reject the null, HO. In other words, in small print, is we accept the null. But that's an error. It's wrong. We shouldn't accept the null. The other alternative is correct. So in other words, HA is true, but we throw it out and go, sorry guys, my hearing's crap here, and go with the null, HO. So going back to the pet store here, 70% of households nationwide have dogs. I think it's lower than 70%. A type 2 error in context of this problem would be, okay, I'm going to say, no, it is 70% in my neighborhood too, when in reality, it's actually less than 70%, okay? So the alternative is true, but we go with the original of 70%. So, once again, the alternative in my neighborhood is less than 70% of people have dogs, but I don't know that. I make an error, and I think it is 70%. So the problem with that is that let's say there's not enough dog people here, I'm going to change my rules, I'm going to have a consequence of that, because I'm throwing out and going with a null. I think it's 70, so it's too high. I'll be carrying too much dog stuff, and not, instead, how do I put this? I'm catering to too many dogs, even though it's not the case in my situation. So I'm wasting money on things when I don't actually have 70% of people dogs, I have less than that. So in type 2, you basically accept, but don't ever say accept, we fail to reject, we go with the null hypothesis even though the alternative is actually true. Okay? So the alternative is true, but we don't know that, so we say it's okay, we're not going to go with that one. Type 2 is many times called the OJ exception. The null in a court of law would be you're innocent until proven guilty. And so in OJ's case, we rejected that part. We accepted the fact that he's innocent when in fact he wasn't. Okay? So type 2 is typically a greater type of error to make. It has more serious consequences, sometimes life and death consequences too. Like there's a problem in homework about the blood pressure. Number 27, 20, I think it was, with the blood pressure. If you said, all right, your blood pressure is normal, but you say, I'm going to accept it's normal, in fact it's high, you're not going to treat it, you can have a heart attack and die. That would be a type 2 error. A type 1 error says, oh, my blood pressure is high, when in fact there's nothing wrong with it. So you start taking medication for high blood pressure when you don't have high blood pressure. So remember, type 1 you reject, which was wrong, you shouldn't have. In type 2 we failed to reject or accept, but that's wrong. Okay? We should have rejected it. Now the last thing I want to talk about is power. And this comes in the next section. And this is confusing. Power is making, or how do I put this, correctly rejecting the null, HO. If you correctly reject the null, you have more power. And we'll talk more about it later, but when you should reject the null because it's wrong, doing the right thing basically is more power. We're going to learn later on that power is defined as 1 minus beta, and beta is the probability of making a type 2 error. Okay? So if type 2 error goes up, 1 minus type 2 error, the power is going to change. We'll talk more about this later. It gets real confusing. It's like an inverse relationship. For right now, just know what type 1 error is in context. Make sure you explain the consequences. On the quiz I just made up that's attached to this, you have to talk about the consequences of such an error of making a type 1, type 2 error. Hope that helps. If not, there's some other problems in the book you can look at. But type 1, type 2 error is kind of confusing every year. It's kind of confusing. So I hope you guys can figure that out. Rewind it a couple times. Remember, type 1 error, you reject, but that was wrong. Type 2 error, you failed to reject, and you should have rejected. Take care.